I was at a cocktail party last week and got into a really interesting conversation with a woman who was a little shocked that I was going to be spending so much time alone on the road in our camper. And we got into a really interesting conversation about security. And I think it changed her thinking about whether or not being a solo female in a camper is even an option for her because she had been really interested in doing it but was wondering about her safety. So I'm going to share in this video how I approach safety and why that gives me the confidence to be out on the road alone. But first, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Jennifer Preston. My husband Michael and I are OG Happier Camper owners. We had our first HC1 in 2016, and today we have an HCT. So please like and subscribe, and let's get talking about how I'm going to feel secure on the road. Okay, there's kind of two ways I think about safety when it comes to the camper. One is, how do I minimize the likelihood it's going to get stolen? And then how do I get out on the road and feel safe from a personal safety perspective? So this video is about the latter. How do we keep the rig from getting stolen or, minimize it's going to happen? Let me know, drop a comment below, and I'll do a video specifically on that. But I think when it comes to personal safety, there's kind of three major buckets that I think of. The first is planning, the second is intuition, and the third is probably just this list of tips and tricks that are useful to know. So when it comes to planning, I've done a video on how I go about this. I'll put a link in the comments below, but in the description rather. I'm using all of my technology, as everyone else is at this point. And that's great when the technology works, and it often requires you to have a cell signal in order for your route to be visible on your phone. There are applications that you can get on your phone where with a premium membership you can download the maps. Those are always helpful. But personally for me, old school map books are something I do not leave the house with if I'm going on a long haul trip. I mean, when we lived in Rhode Island, this was not a problem because you're 35, 40 minutes away from every state that surrounds you, not to mention the state capital. So less of a problem in Rhode Island, much different in Montana. And I don't ever want to be in a situation where I don't have a cell signal, and I don't want to get out and set up my Starlink so that I can get some kind of signal to figure out how am I going to reroute myself. And so having a map book with you is, I think, really important. The next thing I would tell you is always, this is what Michael and I do this as a couple, but as a female solo traveler, make sure someone knows your itinerary and check in every day. So I'm going to be solo on this trip for a good part of it. I will be with Michael for the other. And we have shared our itinerary with our kids, and we've told them we will check in every day. And if we don't check in, you can wait one day and then you call the cavalry because something's clearly gone wrong if we haven't checked in. And I say that because one, we have our cell phones. Two, I got Starlink. And three, there's some capabilities on the iPhone now that I'm going to be exploring on this trip. Assuming they work, I will do a video so that I can share that with you. But I'm on the iOS 18 beta, and there's some kind of cool stuff in there. So I've shared my itinerary. I've got my map books. I'm checking in. I would say the last thing you need to make sure you're doing if you have to reroute your trip, don't take any chances. So the weather in our national parks in particular, these are generally beautifully rugged places, can be very variable. And those are areas we want to travel through. So there could be a scenario where you're in a place that is pretty rugged and the road is closed, or you're feeling like, oh man, this is taking much longer than I thought. I need to find a shortcut. Do not take a shortcut over the mountain in like March because the weather is variable. You could get caught in a snowstorm. And if you do decide to change your itinerary, make sure you call that person who you're checking in with every day and say, hey, FYI, instead of going from here to here, I'm actually going to be going down this road. Sorry to bother you, but I just want to make sure someone knows. And if I don't check in, send someone. If for some reason you got caught in bad weather and you needed to stop, do not leave your rig. You are in the most safe place for you right now. You've probably got heat, you've got water, you've got food, you've got clothing. And even if you don't have heat, you can bundle yourself up. There's so much more safety associated with just staying with your rig. And if you've done the share the itinerary and checking in with someone, people are pretty quickly going to have someone out looking for you. I've recently been listening to some stories about folks who made decisions to leave their vehicle and try to get out on foot. And they got into that situation because no one knew where they were. And things did not end well for them. So do not put yourself into that situation. And that's the kind of planning part of how I think about safety. So let's talk about intuition. This is exactly what it sounds like, but it can be hard to follow. So if you pull into camp someplace and it doesn't feel right, don't stay. It's like I've even had this happen at private campgrounds where the people around me did not feel safe to me. And so I left because that was the right thing to do. Now, it might have been fine, but I was not going to sleep that night if I, stayed in that place anyway. So I got on the road and I found a rest area. If you get to a place you're not quite sure, you're feeling like it's probably going to be okay, but you have that little bit of doubt in your mind, do not unhook your camper and don't put down your stabilizers. Because if after a couple hours of sleep you discover that you really don't want to be there, something's happening, just get out of your rig, go to the car and just pull away. You don't want to have to go through those steps of like, oh my God, I have to take up the stabilizers, I got to rehook up the camper. Just leave all of that to the side. Don't put yourself in a situation to having to deal with that. I mean, I suppose you could, if you were hooked up but your stabilizers were down, you could probably rip your stabilizers off the bottom of your rig to get away quickly, but why bother? Just don't do that to yourself. Now, the other scenario to think about is, especially if you're boondocking, even if it's an empty place and you feel like, okay, this is great, there's no one around, if there's a lot of beer bottles or indicators that maybe it's like a partying place for some of the locals, I recommend you don't stay there, because that's a place where people are clearly congregating and they're congregating with alcohol. I don't know about you, but I've made some pretty bad life decisions when I've been drunk, and I certainly wouldn't want to be in the middle of someone else's problem. So that's another thing to be really aware of. I think those are kind of like the intuition categories to be thinking about, and just be safe. Like that should be your mantra. I'm just going to be safe. If it doesn't feel safe, I'm moving on. Better to be in a truck stop. Now, I'm going to look at my notes here because I have a list of those tips and tricks that I think are really useful. And so I want to share those with you. So one is, if you have a dog and you're camping with your dog, that's great, because I feel like that's definitely a deterrent to people, particularly if the dog has that big, deep bark like our dogs do. But you can also create the illusion that you have a dog. I know someone who brings a folding dog crate with them, and she sets it up outside her rig, and that absolutely creates the perspective that there is a dog inside of that camper with her. You could also do that with maybe like a long dog lead. Our long dog leads, they're probably like 30 feet long, and we hook them to the tongue of the camper so the dogs can kind of roam around outside the camper when we're set up someplace where there isn't a 6-foot leash rule. And just having one of those long leads, again, it creates that illusion. And speaking of illusion, the other really smart thing to do is go down to your local Goodwill store and grab a pair of old men's boots, like carpenter boots, work boots, whatever. Put those outside your camper door next to your shoes, and that is going to have people thinking that there's both a woman and a man in that rig. It might just act as a deterrent to somebody who was going to mess with you. Another option is obviously, bear spray, right? You should have that if you're camping anyway, because if you're going on a hike, you absolutely must keep your bear spray with you and ready, not like, oh, I have to go rummaging in my backpack for it. That's not the way to go. So you're going to have bear spray. We also have a bear horn. And that's similar to this idea of also sleeping next to your car keys, right? That red button on your car keys, it creates the beeping alarm sound. So if somebody was started to mess with your camper at night while you were in it, and by the way, we've been camping for 8 years. We've never had any safety or security issues. But if someone did come up close to my camper and there were other campers in the area, if you hit your horn, that's going to startle somebody. They're gonna take off. They don't want other people coming around to figure out what's going on. I think that the last thing to do from a personal safety perspective, and if you don't know about this, this is probably the most important thing: have a personal locator beacon. And they can be pricey. I think they cost a couple $100. iPhone, if you've got an iPhone, the capabilities in the iPhone now will act as a personal locator beacon. Ooh, got some planes going overhead. I will probably do a video on that feature in the iPhone because I think it's so important. But if you are, I would say if you're hiking, I mean, it's a absolute requirement that you have a personal locator beacon. So many people go missing when they're out hiking, even if they know the trails, even if they're only going out for an hour or two. Do not mess around. Make sure you have some way to signal that you need help. The other feature that is coming in on the iPhone that I'm pretty excited about is actually, I think it's called Road Assist. So if you are out in the middle of nowhere and you get a flat tire, in the a text message, you can send it to, I think it's Road Assist, and it will pull up and signal via satellite that you need help with some kind of automotive issue. And, it's like AAA or whatever, you'll be able to get help. So I think that personal locator beacon, do not mess around. If you don't have the iPhone and you don't, or you have it and you don't understand how to use that feature, make sure you buy one and make sure you take it with you when you go in your vehicle, when you're camping or if you're hiking. You don't want to, you don't want your family to be panicking trying to find you when it is so simple for you to make sure that you don't put yourself into that situation. If you have any things that you're doing on personal safety, I'd love to hear them. Put them in the comments below, and I'll integrate them into an updated video. But I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. And I hope I get to see you out camping soon. Take care.